Okay, let's get started. I want to revisit the work we were doing last episode with the containers and most importantly the timeline. So my goal for this is to make some sort of playback / control device using a bunch of assets. So we'll bring in a folder of content, assign all those content little containers that have a separate timeline that has a play, pause and loop button, and turn that into some sort of system. I'm just going to pause for 2 seconds and go and grab a folder of assets. Okay, there we go. So I now have a bunch of GIF assets that these are from Ghost in the Shell, and then I have Boston here that are just general tunnels. So we're going to use these to develop a playback system. So the first thing we want to go to is we want to look at our setup here. So I'm going to split my screen into 2, activate the panel, load in my project 1. Down here I'm going to do textport. Now hopefully this shouldn't use any assets that we've not covered before or any concepts we've not covered before. I don't want to make any promises that I might not keep. So let's have a quick look inside here. First thing we want to do is we want to bring in a folder that has all our data in it. So in this case I'm going to go to Program for People, Touchdesigner, Touchdesigner 101, the comp, assets, and select. So in here I've got a bunch of GIF files. Thankfully the movie filing can play GIF by default, so I'm going to go to image extensions, and that will remove my tunnel folder. So I want just files. And now I want a way to take everything that's in here and plug that into a system that we can use elsewhere. So we're probably going to introduce the Replicator comp that we've not actually explored at all before, which could be quite interesting. But the Replicator comp does exactly what it sounds, and it creates a node for every row in a table that we put into it and creates replicants, deleting them as the table changes. So as you can see, we've already got a folder in. We just loaded it and selected our folder, but the Replicator will allow us to build a comp once and then replicate it as many times as we have assets in this table. So we're actually going to forget about our table just now and build a new container called Playback Controller 0. I'm going to set this to be, let's say all my assets are probably 16 by 9, so I'm going to set this to 320 by 240 to keep an aspect ratio and give it a random color so I can see it and move it to a random position for now. Okay, so in here we want to introduce our GIF, so we're going to do file, movie file in, and I'm going to go and load the GIF I showed you. Standing on edge. So just like a movie, I can play it in reverse, I can play it forward, I can change the speed of it. In info, it has a length. In this case it's only 18 frames at a sample rate of 10 frames per second, so this clip's about 1.5 seconds long, maybe. Okay, we'll come back to this. We'll come back to the length in a second, alright, in a few minutes. But I have my movie file coming in. I then want to do not a select, an out. That's still not the right node. I'm going to do, Jesus, out. But in here, instead of me selecting the movie file in via this, I want to actually select the movie file in from somewhere else. In this case, I want to use the folder in to do it. But before we get there, we're going to add a bunch of different stuff. So when it comes to a video, what sort of things do we have? Let's add a button for each. So the first, we're going to add a button that controls the play slash, we're going to call it play for now. I'll show you code how to make it so that play becomes pause later. And we'll leave that toggle down. So we want to play it. We want to make one that fast forwards it. The inverse that reverses it. Both of these I'm going to change to momentary. And then what else do we want? And let's add a slider that is a timeline as well. We might not use this depending how complex this gets, but we will see. So let's add a null. No, we can't partner buttons to nulls, but let's partner all our objects to our main button and offset them from there. So we're going to have our play pause is floating in, so let's do me.parent.width divided by 2. Take away me.par.width divided by 2. So this is just a programmatic reference to the parent container, which is the 16 by 9 320 by 240 container. And I've said put the button in the middle of it, but because the button draws from the bottom left corner, I'm taking away its width divided by 2, so it's dead in the center. And with Y, let's set this somewhere about there. I'm going to move the fast forward button over me.par.width plus 10. And this one is going to be the opposite, where it's going to be me.par.width minus 10. Negative me.par.width. So just so I'm offsetting these by an amount, that means if I change the scale of any of the buttons or whatnot, it will correctly update the sizes, just because I imagine this container is actually going to change size at some point. And my slider, let's make that width equal to parent.par.width. Play pause forward back. So I'm going to do op play pause dot par dot width times 3 plus 10 plus 30 for the offset. Me dot par dot width divided by 2 minus. I'm just trying to work out how to offset this correctly, because it has the me.par.width divided by 2, take away 20. I'm 5 off for some reason. Right, okay, that's fine. And then we'll move it down slightly. So that means now if I was to move this button, it's going to move all of my play pause buttons together. And then we want to set the background to be equal to out1. So I'm going to click my container, do look, and do /out1. So it's telling it to go inside the container and get the output value. And I'm going to do native resolution or fit height. So it should show us what it's showing. This clip, for example, is, what is its aspect ratio? It doesn't tell me, but it is divided by 270. Its aspect ratio is 1.8. So it's just bizarre. So I'm not going to be able to work with that for now, but if we do fit to width, that should show us the offset, and now I can change my background back to black. So there you go. It's like a super widescreen movie. Almost a 2-to-1 ratio. So what I probably want to do is introduce a fit top before the end here. And I am going to make this so it fits horizontal at scale of 1920 by 1080. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it means it's going to scale any images, because I'm going to basically make 100 copies of this, or copies of this patch that we're making here using the replicator to control all of the footage, and we want to fit it all to our output screen, which in this case is 1920 1080. So if I do fit to horizontal, it means that it will automatically band it for us. And then if we comp in a black background, so I'm going to do, for that I'm going to comp in a constant that is black, plug that in there, and then instead of multiply I do a top and set transform to be input to, so that my movie is my output. There we go. So nothing much has actually changed over here. It just means that we're probably going to scale any footage that comes in. So now if I was to change to this one that is a square, for example, it means it's horizon. Yeah, so it means it's going to scale everything to fit the image correctly without distorting it or making it look strange. Maybe I need to fit, sorry, I need to fit vertical. Do I fit best? I'm just trying to work out the best way to make this fit without distorting everything. Yeah, so I'm just going to leave Touchdesigner to make the decision fit best, because that means that it's going to scale and keep aspect ratios. In this case, this is a square image, and the previous fit horizontal was basically squishing. Which it doesn't actually look that bad, no one would tell, but I know, and that's what matters. So now I have whatever is coming in is being automatically fit to the aspect ratio thanks to the use of... Oh. Why are you so angry? That is not how this should look. How strange. So let me bring it in by dragging it. Oh, okay, that shouldn't be that fast, but we will come back to that in a moment. Yeah, all the other clips are playing fine, so I'll just ignore that one for now and cross that bridge when we get there. So now I've got my playback controls and my container properly scaling so that everything fits. What I want to do is change, manipulate the timeline inside this container so that these play pause buttons control it. So I'm going to come back up to my master level and do add time component. And now in here, I'm going to reorganize my buttons back the way they were before. And I am going to change, I'm going to solo it and make it run independently. That's important, otherwise it will control the master timeline as well. And I'm going to add a null to each of my buttons. And then I'm going to merge them together. We are still going to use a chop execute as we did before, but we're actually going to use it in a slightly different way. So I am going to add a rename to all of these, and so rename, okay, and I'm going to change this to be play pause, this to be back, this to be forward, and this to be timeline. And I'm going to add all these merged chop data to my chop execute. And now I'm going to do a bunch of different things. The most important is that we're going to activate all of these, whether we use them or not. And then inside each inside each function, we're going to use the channel parameter that's being passed into it to decide whether something needs to happen or not. For example, if I do off to on, if channel dot name is equal to play pause, semicolon, the print play. So what this is going to do is it's basically saying it's going to look for the channel name that's coming in this case, play pause, back, forward, or timeline. And if that channel name equals play pause, as in the top one, then it's going to print something only when the value goes from off to on. So now in our text bar, if I clear it, nothing happens. It's disabled. I click it and it goes on, because you can see the value went from 0 to 1, and that executes our piece of code. Touching any of the other buttons doesn't do anything because they are not called play pause. So this is a good way to group chop datas, especially from multiple buttons, and then use them to use conditional loops or if statements to drive what happens. It's a good way to organize your data. Instead of merge, I would call this master execute. It keeps all your chop data together, and then in much larger Touchdesigner projects, this is a really good method for controlling data flow. Okay, when the play pause button comes on, I don't want to print play. I actually want to do me.time.play is equal to 0. And you can see I turn it on and the timeline stops. But we want to be really careful and do the exact opposite when this button is turned off. And you can see play now pauses it and then unpauses it. Doing some really fancy programming, we can also change what play pause says. If I go up a level, or actually if I go down a level, so this is our full screen, the one we're working on, we don't need to see it in its scale. If I wanted to go inside this button here, play pause, and change the text inside this text top, I can inside this program as well. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the timeline, and then I'm going to say operator. It's called play pause /bg dot par, and I want to change the text, so its parameter name is text, so I'm going to do parameter.text is now equal to pause. And then down the bottom, I want to change that text back to play. Now, when you're using Python inside Touchdesigner, the most important thing are the tabs and the spaces. It's a tab delimited, I think is the term, programming languages. So you can see inside the function, for the code to work, I need to offset any code by 1. Anything inside my if statement, I also need to offset by 1. And that's how Python decides what should and shouldn't run inside each piece of code. Now, with any luck, if I push play, the timeline is playing and it says play. I push it again and it says pause. So my words are actually the wrong way around, but you can see that now programmatically we change our flow. Okay, brilliant. So the next thing I want to do is I want to control the playback of this movie file. And I've got two ways I can do it. I can leave it to be sequential and then just change the speed of it. So I can change it to -1 and then it'll go in reverse. But that is going to make it impossible for me to control this timeline down here and skip it to a certain place. So I'm going to add a new piece of code here that says lock the timeline. And then I'm going to add a execute dat in the middle of nowhere. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to create. So what an execute dat is almost the exact same as the chop execute, but it doesn't need a chop value to change to drive it. This chop execute, for example, this dat execute with create toggled means that whenever this node is created, it will run a piece of code. And since we're eventually going to plug this into our replicator, it means that whenever we add an image to a folder and it creates a replicated patch for it, it's going to run a piece of code. Specifically, what we want to do is I'm going to do a hashtag or a pound symbol to write a comment in Python. I'm going to say we want to set timeline length equal to input image, We also want to set playback rate equal to input. So basically we want to set the length of our timeline equal to the length of this, and we also want to set sample rate equal to the same thing. Or we want to set the playback rate equal to the input sample. We're going to do some maths, basically, what I'm telling you. Because if I was to set this to lock to timeline, I think because it's a GIF we're using, it's going to work. So what I might do is I might go and get a video file, if you bear with me 2 seconds. Okay, there we go. Thanks to the brilliant VidEvo site, there's a bunch of free movie downloads in here. We can use these. So I've made a new folder in my assets called videos. So now if I open this and open videos, so now we can see that basically okay, so what technically should be happening here is because there's a time lapse, we might not be able to see it, or maybe I'm just being crazy, but no idea why it shows this timeline here. Maybe it's a new addition in this version of Touchdesigner that shows that it has a unique timeline controller, but that's very interesting. So basically, because I've got this locked to timeline, my timeline plays back at 60 frames per second. Yeah, this video is only 30 frames per second, which means that technically it's playing the entire length of it in half the time it should. So we need to do a calculation that when we set the timeline, we work out what the sample rate of the footage is. So it's going to be our total length divided by our sample rate times our global sample rate, so that we can work it in seconds. So we're basically going to go from work out how long it's going to be in seconds and times that by the length of our patch. So we're going to set playback rate equal to the length divided by rate times timeline rate. Because Touchdesigner runs in real time, we want everything to still run in the correct time frame. So, okay, so on create, we are going to go into our movie file in, and we're going to call this input. And we're going to say, we're going to set a variable, so we're going to call it rate is equal to input dot, I'm just going to get the Python reference for this. File height, file width, index, fraction, number of seconds in the movie, true index. Let's see if I can get the length of something. So I'm going to do operator input dot length print rate. Yeah, it has no parameter of length, so let's do input info. So rate is equal to input underscore info, and instead of a parameter, I'm going to reference a channel here, so I'm going to do square brackets length. So now if I cut and paste this, it should print the length is as a variable. So there we go, it says 760. And then we want to do sample is equal to the same thing, so we're going to do the input operator, but it's sample underscore rate. And then finally we want to do true length is equal to its rate. Oh, it's rate divided by sample times me dot time dot rate. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do me dot time dot end is equal to true length. So I'm referencing just functions that I know exist, parameters that I know exist inside the local timeline parameter. So I'm saying set my end time to be the true length. I'm going to do me.time.rEnd is also equal to true length. And now if I cut and paste this, we should see that this updates, but rEnd didn't. Because I think that the actual parameter is range end, so I'm going to come in here and it's range end, yes. So all of this will make sense in a minute when we do it. Range end. Why isn't this working? Range end. Okay, that's obviously not working, so instead of doing me.time, I'm going to do operator local / time .par .end, and then I'm going to do .par .range end. Cut and paste it. You can see that we both update now. Why we've done that, I don't want you to worry about at the moment, but it basically means that now we can put a mirror of this timeline into our slider and we'll have an accurate depiction of what's happening. Because it now means that our timeline is very, very specifically the exact length in frames it needs to be to match the sample rate, the correct sample rate and playback for our image. Because this runs at 30 frames per second, but our patch is 60, we need to set our length to twice as long because it's actually going to cook twice as many frames. The more we do this, the more you'll understand why we just processed that, but for now, just trust me and set it equal to the length equal to the length divided by the frame rate times your global sample rate. Perfect. Now, that now means that we can actually change the flow of the timeline. So in here, I can do if off to on, but I'm going to move back one, so I'm going to push the left arrow key. I'm going to say if channel.name is equal to back semicolon, or just colon, then do me.time.play is equal to -1. No, obviously not. Operator, wrong one. There we go. So where the change we're making, we need to tell the back button to actually go and reference the operator, because when it gets to 0, as we learned last video, it's actually going to stop it playing. I'm going to copy and paste this and say that if it's equal to forward, and make that equal to 1. That just means we can now reverse it and play it. The reason this starts lagging is that the playback engine is not built to preload frames from our negative way. So every frame it's on, it's loading one in front rather than one behind. So this will play smooth, this won't. It's just the way of the world, sadly. But it's something if anyone ever want to do, they can. Okay, perfect. So we can pause it, we can play it back, forward. I also want to do if forward is pressed and if channel dot name equal forward. I'm trying to do a double check here to see that basically if the program isn't playing and someone pushes forward, then do something. So in that case, we're going to do inside our forward loop. Want to do a check to see if I'm going to do if operator master underscore execute channel play pause is equal to 0, then we want to set play to be equal to 1 again. So that means that basically anytime the video is paused and forwards pushed, it's going to start playing again. And we also want to change the name of it. Play is equal to 1, and so we're basically copying this text here. So no, we want to go back to it saying pause. So there we go. So it says now if someone pushes the forward button, it comes in here, does this loop, and if while it's doing this if statement, if master execute play pause is also equal to 0, no, we want that to be equal to 1. So if it's equal to 1, as in it's already paused, then we want it to reset the play button, so this goes back to being pausable. And instead of doing that, I might just do operator play pause dot click. So what I'm actually going to tell it to do is go and push this button again rather than just change its text, because essentially it was changing the text of it, but it wasn't actually updating what was happening. Operator play pause unexpected indent. There we go. So now if it's paused, someone pushes the forward button, it also goes forward and changes the text. If the same happens on back, we want to change this so that okay, let me cut this, put that there. So basically what we want to happen is we want it to go and click the button if someone pushes back and then change the timeline. And that means that it should still scroll back. Okay, that's going to be a more complex problem that we'll need to come back to and fix, because if it's paused and you push back, it's going to go forward instead of back, but we will cross that bridge later. Okay, so now we've got it so our buttons pause, forward, and then back. Now all we need to do is make sure the timeline updates and follows the correct path. So we need to do that by working out how wide our button is and clicking it in the right place. So I'm going to bring a select out of here. Actually, I won't do that at all. I'll just go into my execute and I'm going to enable on frame start. And on frame start, we want to change the position that our slider is pressed timeline. And because our timeline is the exact same as our physical timeline, or a frame is the exact percentage of physical time, all we need to do is some maths. So we need to work out percentage based on type, current frame divided by timeline length, and then click slider in right place. So as simple as that. We should in our execute, we want to reference operator input underscore info. I wonder if I just take the index fraction, will it work? Index underscore fraction. Time is equal to, now I do operator timeline dot click at time. Let's see what happens. So now our timeline should be getting updated to the index of the movie that we're currently at. Because our movie is the exact length of our timeline, this should be accurate. So when this gets to the end, it should snap and go back to the start. Now we want to change it so that even though this is scrolling, I can go in and click here. You can see if I hover my mouse over and click the mouse, it doesn't actually update the position, it's just showing us a representation. So we need to do some conditionals to we want to say that basically if our mouse is inside this panel, then don't execute this piece of code because we want to update where it is. So in here, I'm going to say this panel is thankfully already, let me get the term. So if I bring in a fresh panel, you can see that panel reads panel values from a parent component into chop values. Panel can be accessed using the panel expression. So basically it brings in details about when the mouse is or isn't on top of this comp element. And then what I want to do is I want to make sure when the mouse is inside, I want to stop executing this piece of code. So I'm going to include inside and call it inside. So now I have, if my mouse is inside, this is set to 1. If it's not, it's not. And in my on frame start, on the execute on the top layer, I'm going to do operator, or sorry, if operator timeline / panel 1 inside, so get the channel inside, is equal to 1, or if it's equal to 0, then execute a piece of code. Otherwise, we don't want to do that. So now when I'm inside, you can see that the timeline stops updating, but the video keeps playing. And now I have free reign to say that if my mouse is inside here and I click it, so we can add the click parameter. Click isn't the right one. Again, I'm going to load up other panel. We want select. So if I do select and do click. So now you can see it's constantly clicking. But if I put my mouse inside, it stops clicking it because we are using the timeline.click function to press it, so it's getting a constant click reading every frame. Mouse inside, my mouse inside updates, but click stops updating. So now we have free reign to move the position, and every time we click it, we want to update our timeline position. So that's quite a lot to take in, but what we want to do is in our execute, if operator, so I'm going to copy this. So if my operator timeline is equal to 1, I'm going to add a new bracket at the start. And my operator operator speech timeline / panel 1 click is equal to 1, then we want something to happen. And that something is we want to set our operator timeline dot click equal to operator timeline panel 1's v1 value. So now, all things going smoothly, we're actually getting an error. I need to work out why. Maybe it's only one and in Python. So we're almost there. I just need to work out what's wrong with this code. Syntax error. I'm probably missing a speech mark. Quote. Open, open, open. Close, close, open, close, close, close. Invalid syntax. I'm doing it like I always get confused. I've been doing a lot of work in other programming languages and it's just throwing me off completely. Okay, if operator timeline panel 1 inside is equal to 1 and my operator timeline panel 1 dot click is also equal to 1, then do something. See if that's, oh, simple as that. I've not closed the brackets on that bottom part. Double and it doesn't like. I don't want to, actually that is incorrect. I don't want to click the timeline of that value. What I want to do is I want to set me.time.frame equal to operator timeline / panel 1 v1, so get its current percentage, and I want to times that by me.time.end divided by me.time rate. That should work. Okay, so my math is slightly wrong here, but what we need to do is we need to get the UV that we're clicking on. In this case, that'll be a 0 point something value, and then set the timeline to be that right time, so that it jumps to the right place. So let me do some quick maths here. So let me print (22.3) obviously isn't the right answer there, but I have a total length. So let's do it from the middle. Maybe if I just do it by me.time.end. Simple as that. Looks about right to me. So this should be about the dead center, which should be 1340 frames divided by 2, so 670 seems about right. Okay, so that's it. So all I did was I times the position I'm clicking it by the total time, and that gives us a normalized coordinate. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. So now we have a timeline that we can control playback with, reverse, forward, and pause buttons that control it. So all we need to do now is we need to take one of these for each of the inputs from the folder. So if I do an in, we want to connect up the folder 1, and then we're going to add this to something called a select, and it's going to select a row by index, and the index is going to be me.parent.digits. And what this does is it specifically tells it to go and look at the parent of the digit and get the number that it is. And that's why we used 0 in this one that we built. So now if I made a second, we can see that the select would actually have a value in it, and we can use that to drive some data. So in here, we're going to go in and we want to use the path. So we're going to programmatically reference this over to operator select1 dot par, oh no, not par. And to reference tables, we do it like a chop value, but instead we give it the table number. So we do it, it's on row 0, column 1 is the path. So now any future nodes that have different numbers will accurately update. So now we're ready to introduce our replicator. And in our replicator, we're going to use our template data as the original. And our master operator is going to be our playback control 0. And we're going to call our item movie and then index. So you can see it will create a comp based on what we just made, titled after each of the indexes. It plays, it loads the individual folder inside each. And now if we go up a level onto our master and we do children allowing grid rows, what this will do is it will automatically populate all of our screens. It will automatically populate our screen with all of the buttons that, or all of the containers that exist inside this panel. The replicator has something called a callback data associated with it that allows us to programmatically reference all of the other nodes in the network. So an example of what we'd want to do would be add a select. Add a select, sorry. And we want to connect, not a select, a switch. Jesus, my clicking today. We want to connect all of these up to this node when it's created. And we can do that with Python. So you can see there is some code that says for C and new operators, and in this case operators is a list of data that we create, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in this case. That's actually 10, I just can't count. What we want to say is C references the one that is being generated at that time for the full loop. And we want to say C dot output connectors 0 dot connect and which object we want to connect it to. In this case, it's going to be master switch. So we're going to say operator master switch and close brackets. And then I'm going to click my replicator and recreate them all. And it gives me an error. Because that means I have used the wrong operator. So I'm going to go to derivative connector class. And using this will tell me the code I actually wanted to view, which is output connector 0 dot connect I would have thought it was right. Output connectors 0 connect. Oh, okay. Because these are comps, they have a special command to call. In this case, it's going to be output comp connector. Obviously not. Master switch. I wouldn't think I needed to add that. Open, close. Input connectors 1. Noise connectors, output connectors 0 connect to a value. Oh, it's just spelt wrong, I think. There we go. Okay, so I was right. I just spelled everything wrong. So even though this is a container we're working with, we don't need to container comp, because unlike a geo, that's a poor example. I can't think of anything at the moment that has an input and output, but basically we want to actually connect the top that's coming out of this rather than the geo or the container itself. So now we have a bunch of videos that we can individually control because they're all created as instances. What I would say is there is an error with the creation top. So if I go to my Replicator and recreate them all, it means that the onCreate code didn't work properly. So if I do let's do the onCreate and put that at the start from frame start. Now if I recreate them all, one thing important to note is that if I change the state of the master replicator here, the one that has nothing, and then recreate them all, you can see they all now are paused. Whereas if I unpause this and recreate them again, okay, timelines still aren't updating properly. Let's have a quick look at the code here. Okay, so let me solo this timeline. So this should be 19. Wow, I don't think this has a sample rate of 100. Jesus. Let me use another one as an example. That's really poor. So this should be 40 divided by 10 times 60, 240. So this is the full length of this clip. You can see it's correctly updating. Okay, so there is a problem with the execution of our code, and I'm just trying to think of the best way to solve it. What I might do is I might add it to the replicator callback so that it does it during the creation rather than in that code. So I do the connect and I do operator C plus /timeline / time dot par dot end is equal to, let me do 100, let me just test. No, it doesn't like that. Non-type, no attribute par. So let me do a print test of this. Let me see what that looks like. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to access the internal, oh, it's called local, that's why. I'm trying to access the internal timeline for each timeline as it's created, and currently set it to the frame end rate to 100. So now if I go into one of these and its frames is equal to 100, I know I've done the right thing. If I recreate all, okay, so I really just want to solve this problem, and then we'll end the stream here for now because we've covered a load of details and the video is getting quite long, but I want to persevere. So by all means, if you end the video here, I completely understand. We are at the end. It's just all I'm going to do is I'm going to work out how to correctly scale the timeline for each of these videos with the video that we're loading inside of it. So I don't want to do that. That's obviously the wrong solution. Okay, let me do a check in here. So I'm just going to turn off onCreate and copy this code. And on frame start, what we're going to do is check the current timeline and say if me.time.end does not equal true length, then rerun the code. Print does not equal. So it's telling me that the true length does not equal the so in here we want to see if it does not equal, then we want to set so the frame rate for this one should be 11, but for some reason it's just not updating properly. So let's see if we can put all of this into a chop execute instead. I think I've been looking at the wrong timeline. I think that has worked. Damn it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that working one into here, and then I'm going to recreate them all from my replicator. Okay, they do all appear to be working, it's just the timeline isn't properly cooking when you've not been inside the object. So you can see I've got one here that's not scrolling, I go inside of it, it starts scrolling. It's not scrolling, it starts scrolling. And it appears to work. Okay. Last thing I want to do is I want to hide the playback controller. So if I disabled it and then replicated, you can see that they did all disappear. So what we want to do in code is we want to see master.power.display is equal to 1, and at the very end we want to see master.power.display is equal to 0, and master.power.enable is also equal to 0. So using the master reference that I can see is passed into the replicator, I'm going to go here and disable the enable and display tabs. So run it. You can see this is disabled and it's not enabled. I lose the one that I have done here, and now I have my interactive buttons. I think what the problem is that technically the chop execute, or this dat execute, doesn't actually cook all of this information until you visualized it. So I'm just wondering if in perform mode this would happen. But if you look at the way that these are jumping, they're clearly limited to like the 11 frames or so that this one is setting them to, or we did set them to. But if I go in here, I'll never be able to see it because it correctly updates. So I wonder if there's a way to force them all to cook. C.cook. I'm just going to disable the little print line we have in here. It's screwing with us. Can't see the errors in my timeline. So it has no attribute cooking. So what we want to do is look at a container and look for its cooking flag, because we're going to cycle it. Allow cooking, get or set the cooking flag. Allow cooking. So let's try that. So let's do allow cooking is equal to 0. Replicate them all, they should be off. Set it to 1. There we go. So we cook cycle them as they load, and by cook cycle them I mean we basically toggle the internal cook, And once we've created it, that then updates the timeline on them all. So now in perform mode, we have a bunch of clips that are ready to play, running on, in this case, 10 independent timelines that we can control as and when we need to. I think we're heading towards some sort of simple VJ controller here. So in the next episode, because of how long this is, we'll look at how to click and enable a clip as an output. See you in the next one. Make sure you save this.